Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play, where I'm here bringing you another setup and rules video, this time for The Great Wall, which, if you were unaware, is the new game that Awaken Realms have just brought to Kickstarter. So we're going to be looking at this Kickstarter prototype edition, and because this is a prototype, this means of course that all of the components and rules that you see in this video are subject to revision following a successful Kickstarter campaign. So as usual, what I'll do is I'll give you guys a brief overview of the game, and then I will go into detail about the components and the setup and the rules. And of course what I'll do is I'll have text up on the screen showing you just exactly where everything is and the sections down below with timecodes so you can find something if you want to look at it specifically. So without further ado, let's get talking about the Great Wall. In the Great Wall, 2 to 4 players are going to be taking on the roles of Chinese noble families or noble houses, and they are going to be gathering resources and using these resources to build up the Great Wall to protect from the Mongol invasion. It's a competitive game, and whoever has accrued the most honor at the end of the game will be the winner. There are many avenues to victory in the game. There will be endgame scoring cards that are randomized at the beginning of the game. There's going to be scoring for building the Great Wall. There's also going to be scoring for helping to defend the Great Wall, and you can also build up asymmetrical scoring methods over the course of the game through each player's general and advisors that give them unique abilities different to all the other players. I would say that the game takes probably about 2 hours to play, but this depends on your player count and everyone's familiarity. There's also a high level of negotiation in the game, which means that depending on your players and the level of table talk they want to engage in, the game could be longer or shorter. So why don't we get stuck into looking at some of the components, but I'll really just give you a quick overview so you can understand what I'm talking about when we get to the setup and the gameplay explanation. So we'll get stuck into the first section of this video, the component rundown. So of course the game comes with a big game board. Now we've got a fabric board, and here it is. Here you can see the main game board for the game, but here we've got the worker section area and the Mongol invasion area. But this board is very large and it's taking up a lot of my space here, so I'm just going to put it away for now while we look through the rest of the components. So I feel like the first thing I should show you guys are the miniatures and the Great Wall. So why don't we take a look at the Great Wall first. When you build a section of the Great Wall, you can put out one of these tiles here onto the board. And each time you build a new section of the Great Wall, you'll increase its size. There are a total of 9 pieces of the Great Wall in the game box, so that hopefully you can build the whole thing to keep out the Mongol invasion forces. However, if that's not good enough, the game also comes with these barricade tokens here that you can set up in front of the Great Wall to keep it safe. Now, of course, you've got to protect it from the Mongol hordes, and the deck comes with this big old deck of horde cards. These are all the forces that are coming against the Great Wall. There should be 24 cards in here, and on the back of each card is a unit, and there are a number of different units that will come and try and take you down. You can also back a version of the game that comes with wooden meeples instead of the plastic miniatures, and this is slightly cheaper. Hiding inside the city, each player will have these Clerk miniatures, and these will be the figures that you place out on the board. They're your workers for the worker placement aspect of the game. So they're hiding in the city, and they need protecting. We can defend the city with our archers. Each player has 4, and these archers can be used for various purposes in the game, but primarily they will sit atop the wall, shooting at the attackers. Each player will have 10 spearmen, and these spearmen can be used as overseers, motivating your workers to work harder, or they can be sent to defend the wall against the Mongol aggressors. Each player also has 2 cavalry miniatures. These are more versatile for attacking the enemies and give you more options and more rewards, but they're very expensive to hire. Additionally, each player has 2 tokens like this, used to track their position on the T track and the leadership track. These tracks are important for breaking ties in the game. All of the soldiers also come in yellow and green. So in addition to that, we've got here a post office board. This is going to be used for hiring advisors with asymmetrical powers. We've got player screens here for each of the different player colors. And on the back of each of these player screens, there's a handy reference guide to all the phases and rules of the game. So we've got 8 general cards. And each general has asymmetrical abilities and powers. Players will get to choose one at the start of the game. Got artifact cards, and these are asymmetrical win conditions that we'll deal out at the beginning of the game. Here we've got tactics cards, which will give you advantages in military conflict. Here are the advisor cards, and each advisor gives a player a power, which is very, very powerful. So thinking about these cards is really important to doing well in the game. Here we've got 4 decks of command cards in each player's color. There are 6 cards, and playing these cards out in the command phase will determine what actions you get to take with your worker placement. Choosing which cards to play and planning what your opponents are going to play is a big part of the game. And of course, we've already seen the horde cards. Each player gets an honor marker. This is a marker that goes around the honor track, which is essentially victory points. And if you look closely, you might recognize these ones. And then we've got resources: stone, wood, gold, and meditation. And finally, we've got wound tokens, which will be used to indicate when horde cards take wounds that haven't been issued by spearmen or cavalry, i.e. when they've been shot by archers or other cards deal wounds to them. So now that we've had a look at all the components, we're about ready to start setting up the game. So, we're ready to set up the game. Before I start putting out all the pieces and talking you through the process, so in this video I will be setting up a 4-player game because that's what I have the rules for. However, I will only be setting up one player's pieces because they all work the same way. I'll be using the models from the other players when I need to demonstrate things on the setup and in the gameplay, but other than that, we'll just put out the pieces for one player, which will help save on space. So, let's talk about the setup. The first thing we're going to do is put out the board. So now we've got the board out, we can put out the resources. The resources, I've put them here below their pertinent spots. So you go here to collect wood, stone, gold, and meditation. So I've put them out just here. But we're just creating communal pools that everyone can reach. Up here, we've got the area where the invading forces will come and attack the Great Wall. So I'll create a pool of wound tokens up here that everyone can reach. We'll take this deck of tactics cards and put it here on the board. So here's the action spot where players can collect tactics cards. So we'll just give the deck a good shuffle, and then after we've done that, we'll put it down here. Now that we've done that, we can begin giving the players their pieces. Like I said, I'm only going to set up one player color for this demonstration, but this is a game for 4 players, so you should do this for all 4 players. For this demonstration, we'll set up the blue player. So at this stage in the game, every player should be given one player's screen for hiding their player's resources. They should be given 6 command cards in their player color. They should have 10 spearmen, 2 cavalry, 8 clerks, and 4 archers. What we'll do next is we'll set up the Postmaster board, and this is going to be a marketplace of advisors. But the reason we're doing this now is you can also buy more clerks. Each player will take 3 of their clerks and put 1 clerk into each of the top spots in the columns on the Postmaster board. This leaves each player with 5 clerks in their player pool. The next thing we're going to do is deal out 3 artifact cards. Now these artifact cards contain different asymmetrical endgame scoring functions. So here we've got dark armor. This is going to score you points for every soldier you have left on the wall at the end of the game. Another example is the Palace Lantern, which will give you 3 points for every advisor you have at the end of the game. So once you've dealt out 3 of these face up, you return the rest of the game box because you won't need them in this game. So you can leave those artifact cards anywhere on the table, just make sure that everyone can see them and knows what they are. Now we're going to go back to our players and we're going to deal each player 2 generals and 4 advisors. They're going to pick 1 of each to keep and get rid of the rest. So our blue player here has 2 generals and 4 advisors to choose from. And every player will be doing this simultaneously. They'll have a look at their options here. And the generals are quite important because what they're going to do is they're going to tell you your production that you get during your income phase. And this is slightly asymmetrical for each general. They're going to give you an ability down here, which might be passive or it might be something else. They're going to give you an ability down here, which is unique to each general. And then down here, they're going to give you your starting position in the T track and the leadership track. So here we've got a general that gains victory points whenever a soldier dies. And here we've got a general who gains victory points whenever you engage with a horse. These 2 are quite militaristic, but they're all very different. So then here we've got 4 different advisors with these very powerful abilities, and already we can see here an advisor that awards you victory points for participating in a battle. Well, that seems like a pretty cool combo here with our general who awards points when your soldiers die, so we elect to keep those two, and we'll put the others back. The generals go back in the game box, they won't be used for the rest of the game. The advisors go back to the advisor deck, and we'll give that a shuffle, and then we'll use it again in just a minute. Once each player has picked the 2 cards they want to start with, we can all reveal them to each other to see what decisions we've made. It's also important to think about the artifact cards and the endgame scoring as well when making this choice. But don't worry though, because you can always buy more advisors over the course of the game. So if you don't like the one you started with, you can get another 5 later on. Now that we've got the remaining advisors here in the advisor deck, we're going to give that a shuffle, and then deal the advisors out into the 6 positions on the Postmaster board. So we've got the deck here, and we'll just put out advisors into each of these positions. The remaining advisors will be put nearby because we'll be needing them during the course of the game. So now we'll put out the player tokens. We'll start by putting the honor tokens onto the honor track. Every player starts with 15 honor because you can lose some even from the beginning. The honor track moves around the worker placement section of the board around here. We can put these tokens out onto the 15 space here. Note that the color order in the stack doesn't matter. We also have the tea house here with this tea track and war room here with this leadership track. If you remember our player discs from our component breakdown earlier, we're going to need these. We're going to set them up onto each of these tracks to determine the order of play and tie breaks during the gameplay. So the function of these you will learn as we go through the gameplay in a moment. Here we can see the red player has taken Wei Hong. The yellow player here has taken Ma Yanlu. The green player has taken Yang Song. And the blue player has Bao Sanyang. We're going to use the generals to determine the starting order on both the T track and the leadership track. So we check the T statistic on each of the leaders, and then we put the tokens in a descending order. So we'll start with Ma Yanlu on the bottom of the T track. And then it looks like Yan Song, Wei Hong, and Bao Sanyang. Now what we should find is that the inverse is true of the leadership track. Bao Sanyang has 9, Wei Hong has 8, Yan Song has 7, and Ma Yanlu has 2, so she goes on top. And there you have it. The T track and leadership tracks have been assembled. Next we're going to give each player 2 of each resource. 2 wood, 2 stone, 2 gold, and 2 meditation. Players will take this and put it secretly behind their player board. Resources are always kept secret from your opponents. So the last thing we're going to do is give these horde cards a shuffle and place them near the horde section of the board. So once we've done that, then we just make sure that the barricades and wall sections are close by and the players can reach them. We start with these very basic walls here on the board itself, so we don't put out any wall sections till we build some. And now with that, we're actually ready to start the game. So let's talk about the gameplay. Each game of the Great Wall is broken up into 3 rounds, and each round represents a year of generating resources and defending the wall. So each round is broken up into 4 seasons, which represent different phases of gameplay. The first season is the autumn season, in which we're going to get income and we're going to witness new horde cards come out here on the horde section of the board. After the autumn, we're going to go into the winter. This represents the planning step as we prepare for the spring when we'll do a harvest and the fighting. But of course, in the winter, what we're actually going to be doing is playing out command cards. We'll be placing workers on this worker placement section of the board, and we'll be activating spaces to generate resources, recruit soldiers, manipulate the T track, draw cards, hire new advisors, and all manner of different things. Once the winter phase is over, we'll go into the spring phase, where we will resolve the conflicts here on the Great Wall. After we've done that, we'll go into the summer phase, where we're all going to donate any resources we have left to try and improve the wall, and we'll be awarded a lot of victory points for that. Furthermore, we can also hire a new advisor or a clerk for free from the Postmaster office board. Once the summer is concluded, it's back to autumn with a new income phase, and the cycle begins again. Once we've been through this 3 times, we'll score these 3 artifact cards, and then that will determine everybody's final score for endgame. So now what we'll do is go through the phases in more detail. It makes sense to go through them in order, so we'll start by looking at the autumn phase. We're going to look at this worker placement section in detail when we get to the winter phase, and we're going to look at all the different spaces and what they do as well. But for the first phase of the game, the autumn phase, it's important to note that these 4 spaces down here represent resources, and I've placed the resources here in the pools below those spaces. These spaces here, beneath these worker placement areas, are called overseer spaces. You can send your soldiers to the overseer spaces in order to increase the production of your workers in these areas. Essentially, they're cracking the whip. During the income step, which is the first step of the autumn phase, you will gain income from 2 different areas. Every player will gain the production here on their general card. Everyone's production is just subtly different. Once you've gained the 9 resources depicted here on your general card, you will also gain income for every overseer space you have. Note that this is distinct to the way the overseers work in the winter phase, which we'll look at later. But here in the autumn phase, during income, you will gain the number of resources depicted here for each space up here. So we're going to gain 1 wood. So you'll gain additional resources for each of the overseers you have in each of the 4 resource spaces, depending on their position along the overseer track. Once we've completed the income stage, we're going to move on to the invasion stage, where we're going to fill up the rows here on the invasion part of the board, and we're going to fill up a number of rows based on the round of the game. So in the first round, we're going to put 3 cards out, 1 in each row, 1 at the bottom of each column. Later on, in round 2, we'll put out a number of cards to make sure the first 2 rows are filled. For round 1, we'll just put out 3 cards like this. There's an infantry card, we've got arsonist's card, and we've got a battering ram. Some of these cards might be defeated at the end of round 1 and removed from the board. When we do the invasion stage in round 2, we'll put out cards to make sure that the first 2 rows are filled, which of course means 2 cards here in this column, because 1 was defeated. Of course, this means at the beginning of round 3, we should fill up all 9 spaces. But for now, just 3 will do. Once you've done the invasion stage, you're actually done with autumn, and you can move on to winter. Winter is where the bulk of the gameplay will take place. Although spring is a pretty chunky section of gameplay as well, winter will take the longest. It involves a lot of planning and consideration. In this phase, we're going to be playing command cards from our hand in order to manipulate the workers on the board. The winter phase is divided up into 2 command stages. Each command stage is identical, and you follow the same process for each one. Each command stage is divided up into 2 substages. Choose command cards and resolve command cards. So the first thing we're going to do is choose our command cards. The first thing you do is each player picks one of their 6 command cards that they'd like to play and puts it into a pool in the middle of the table. Each player has chosen a command card and they've been placed into a pool. Now what we're going to do is flip them over, and each player can see what each other player has chosen. So what you can see here is an initiative track for command cards. These are the order in which the cards are going to play out. So the player on top of the T track, in this case our blue player, can choose which position they want to place their card in. Maybe they want to go first, or maybe they want to go fourth. They can choose any position they want because they're on top of the T track. And once they've chosen that position, the next player, in this case red, will get to pick their position in initiative order. Once the cards have been locked into their initiative order, then we can move into the second step of the command stage, which is resolve the cards. So we'll go through and resolve each card in the initiative order. Once we've resolved each card, we'll just flip them face down like this as we go through resolving each card. Then we've finished the first command phase, and we'll go on to command phase number 2. The 4 cards that have already been played are discarded for now. Players will then choose another 4 cards, and then in the order of the T-track, we'll place those 4 cards in initiative order and resolve them again. It's worth noting that the T-track might have changed by this point. It's also worth noting that you cannot play the same card you played in the first command stage. Once we've been through each command stage, then the winter phase is over and we'll move on to spring. But let's have a look in more detail at the cards and at the action spaces. We're back to the first command stage, and the first card that has been played is the Despotism card, which has been played by the red player. We know that the red player is second in the T-track order, which is important to note for later. But for now, we're going to resolve this card. So we'll look at this command card in more detail. After I've explained how the command cards are resolved, I'll go through all the action spaces and all 6 command cards that the players start with. But if you don't want to see all of that, then of course you can skip ahead using the sections in the description below. So, the red player has played the Despotism card into the first initiative space. Each command card has up to 3 areas of text on, although some only have 2. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be paying attention first to the black text here. This means that the active player, the player who played the command card, can do this. Move 4 clerks to chosen locations. This means move or place 4 workers. So we'll look at that in a minute. Every other player can then do the gold text. So every other player is going to get to move 2 workers. Finally, there's a special action down here. In this case, it's perform an advanced activation of 1 chosen location. And we'll look at how that works in a minute as well. Let's start by looking at how you move workers around and activate action spaces. So here we can see the worker placement area of the board. We've got the 4 resource gathering spots down here, which have these worker placement areas on them here. We've also got these green worker placement areas that look like this, and some more of these red ones up here and here as well. There is an important distinction between these different kinds of spaces. A red player's Despotism card allows them to play 4 workers to chosen locations on the board. They can take those 4 workers from their personal supply, which means in front of their player screen, not on the board. If they've already placed a worker on the board, they can also freely move that worker around as well. The only time that a worker cannot be moved as part of resolving move location is if they happen to be in a track like this, which is full of workers. Once a track is full, it's essentially locked down, and workers cannot be moved away from the track until the space is resolved. Note that this only goes for red tracks like this, or even like this one here. These green tracks can have any number of workers in them, and workers can leave at any time. The red tracks will not be activated until they're full. The green spaces will be activated no matter what. I think it goes without saying that if you're ever going to move a clerk, and there are none left in your common pool, then you must move them from locations on the board. If you don't want to or can't do that, then I'm afraid the opportunity is lost. So in order to resolve Despotism, a red player will be looking at putting out 4 workers. We'll say for whatever reason he's decided he wants some stone, so he's going to put 2 workers here on the stone track. He's going to get 1 stone for every worker he puts down. This is true of 3 of the resource tracks, but gold, you need 2 workers for a single piece. It's harder to come by. This track will not activate until it's full of workers. Spaces are activated after the entire card is resolved. So if our red player wants to move all 4 of his clerics to the chosen location, in this case the quarry for stone, then he's now resolved his turn. Then, starting in the order of the T track, every other player will get to move 2 workers. So we'll start with the blue player, and then green, and then yellow. So perhaps the blue player decides to play here, and maybe the blue player would like some gold down here as well. And so now you can see that the players have all played their pieces onto the board. We've almost resolved Despotism, but it says down here, perform advanced activation of 1 chosen location. If we're playing a card without any further text, we would then activate pertinent spaces. In this case, that means any full red areas, so only the quarry, and any green areas that have any clerks at all. So in this case, the Postmaster office. Advanced activation means that you can activate a space that is not full. So in this case, our red player can also choose to activate the gold mine, the shrine, or the academy. They can also choose to activate nothing as part of their advanced activation. So what they decide to do in this case is activate the gold mine. They do this because the blue player only has one clerk down there. This means that the green player is going to get one piece of gold for having two clerks, and the blue player will get nothing because this is kind of a dick move. Furthermore, there's no incentive to activate any other locations for the red player because he doesn't have any workers in other locations. So with that in mind, the green player takes their clerks back, the blue player returns their clerk, and the green player also gets a piece of gold. Whenever an area is activated, you also have the opportunity to put out an overseer if you have clerks present there. But you can only do it if you gain resources. This means that the green player can now play 1 wood and 1 stone from their personal supply in order to put out an overseer in the first position. When placing an overseer, you can pick a spearman or an archer, so you might want to think about which soldiers you're going to use later. And you put them down here in the first position. The blue player cannot put out an overseer because they didn't gain any resources. If you ever want to place an overseer or upgrade them to the next space, then you have to have taken resources. So now the clerks are returned to their respective players, along with any resources they gained from the space. Now the red player has obviously gone heavy on stone. They're going to gain 4 stone from this, which hopefully they'll have a good use for. You'll find out more about what you could spend resources on when we go through all the action spaces, but it's important to note here that this is significant because if you ever fill up any of these spaces entirely with your own clerks, then you lose victory points equal to the number of victory points depicted here. So for taking 4 stone, the red player is going to lose 2 honor. So then, of course, the red player still has the opportunity to put out an overseer, and then they'll collect their workers and any pertinent resources. Now that this has been resolved, there is only one more space to resolve, which is this one here. Because it's green, it's always resolved. And remember, the red player chooses the order in which these spaces activate. Let's say, for the sake of example, the red player had placed a clerk to the Postmaster's office. Even though the red player chooses the order in which the spaces are activated, but the resolution of the space would be carried out in order of the T-track. This means that even though red is currently the active player in resolving their command card, blue will get to buy an advisor before red. But if red wants, they can choose to activate this space before or after any other spaces. We'll look at how you resolve the Postmaster office board in just a moment. Let's just finish up our discussion about resolving command cards. At the end of the phase, these two will resolve this space, of course, because it must be resolved as a green space. The workers will return to their respective owners, and then the card is completely resolved and it will be flipped over. We'll now move on to the green card, next in line. The green player will become the active player. They'll move around workers as they see fit. Every other player will get to move 1 worker as part of this card, and there's no advanced activation, but any of the spaces that fill up or any of the green spaces with workers will have to be activated in an order chosen by the green player, but the spaces themselves resolved in order of the TT track. This can be pertinent, so it's important to pay attention to the order in which things take place. Once the activation of the spaces is resolved, the green card will be flipped over and will progress through to the end. Then, repeating the cycle 1 more time before completing the winter phase. Now that we've discussed that, let's have a look in a bit more detail at these different spaces. We'll start by reviewing the resource spaces again very quickly. So you've got your 4 resource spaces here: the logging camp, the quarry, the gold mine, and the shrine. And these give up the 4 resources in the game: wood, stone, gold, and meditation. These are primarily used for recruiting soldiers and building the Great Wall. Meditation is primarily used for playing tactics cards and also saving soldiers that are killed on the wall. More about that when we get to spring. These tracks will only activate once they are completely full, unless activated by an advanced activation found on some command cards. If the track is populated exclusively by 1 color of clerk, then the player of that color will lose honor points equal to the number here. Note that this is also true if the space is activated early and is not full. The blue player will still lose 2 honor because there are only blue clerks here. When the space is activated, whether or not it was advanced activation and whether or not honor was lost, they'll take their clerks back, they'll get a pertinent number of resources, which is 1 per clerk for these 3 spaces, and 1 gold for every 2 clerks in the gold mine. And then you have the opportunity to place or upgrade an overseer. You will only ever have 1 overseer per track, and to place into the first space, you must pay the resources here, a stone and a wood. If you want to progress to the next track, you pay a stone and 2 wood. Our blue player might place a overseer down to the first track here, and an overseer can be an archer or spearman, you must decide. The next time this space activates, they will gain resources for their clerks, plus additional resource for the space of the overseer. So in this example, they would gain 3 stone. Then because they gained resources, they could then pay to upgrade the overseer again. The barracks, where you can come to recruit soldiers, works a little differently to the resource spaces, although it does have an overseer track as well. So up here you'll put out your clerks, just like in the resource spaces, and it will activate when full or via advanced activation. Again, if you have just 1 color of clerk here, that player will lose 2 honor points. And here you can hire soldiers. You can take one of these 3 actions per clerk here. So if you have 1 clerk, you can hire a spearman or an archer, or upgrade a spearman or archer to a horse. Hiring a spearman costs 2 stone and 2 wood. Hiring an archer costs 2 meditation and 2 wood. And when you hire them, they're immediately placed in one of the Great Wall spaces. For spearmen, you must choose a wall you want them to defend and put them behind it. So in this case, we've put the spearman in the middle section. But he could also go onto the left or onto the right. And this is, of course, a strategic decision. You're looking at these cards and thinking about the areas you can defend. And you'll understand more about this when we get to the explanation of spring. If you hire an archer, they go onto the wall into one of these archer spaces. At the basic level, the walls only have space for 1 archer, but this improves as the walls are upgraded. If you already have spearmen or archers on the wall, you can pay 4 gold to upgrade them for a horse. You can also do this as 1 single action. So you can purchase a spearman and then upgrade them to a horse and just put out the cavalry miniature straight away. It should be noted though that if our blue player has already placed these soldiers out here on the wall and wants to upgrade one of them to a cavalry miniature, the cavalry miniature must go on the same wall section as the piece it replaced. And you can replace either archers or spearmen, and they return to your pool. If the blue player later buys their second cavalry miniature as an entire purchase, they can decide which section of wall they want to put it in. Very technically, you should put out the spearman first, and then replace it with the cavalry miniature. And this might become pertinent based on card interactions. There's no limit to the number of soldiers you can assign to each wall section. Note that these are separate actions, which means that in order to purchase a spearman and upgrade them to cavalry, you'll need at least 2 clerks here in the barracks. And then if you've successfully carried out one of these 3 actions, you can place or upgrade an overseer. It costs 2 meditation to place an overseer on the first spot, and the overseer here offers a discount to the entire cost of your purchase. For example, if you're purchasing a spearman and an archer, you'd be paying 2 stone, 2 meditation, and 4 wood. And then you could reduce one of those resource costs by 1. It costs 4 meditation to go up to stage 2, which is the exact same, but you get 2 off the total. And finally, you can go up to stage 3 for 4 meditation and a gold, which gets you 2 costs off the total, but you also get a free spearman every time you do a recruit action. Note, however, that you are component limited. So, if you ever go to hire a cavalry and you've got none left because there's only 2 and they're already on the wall, or you've run out of spearmen because you've put them all into overseer positions, then you cannot have any more of that model type. The next space we'll look at is the Academy here. When the Academy space is triggered, then players will get to draw 1 card from the Tactics deck per clerk. So in this case, 1 card for yellow and 1 card for blue. Note that here, the yellow player could take both of these spaces without a honor penalty because there's no marker. And the yellow player would just draw 2 cards off of the Tactics card deck. Tactics cards are special cards that are played in the spring phase and can affect the defense of the wall. So we'll look at those in a bit more detail when we get to spring. But you can have a maximum hand of 6 cards, so if you'd ever draw cards that would put you over your hand of 6, you draw them and then discard down. This is the messenger's office, and for every clerk you put in the messenger's office, you can move up to 2 units from one wall section to another wall section. So in this case, our blue player put down one clerk, which means they could take these two and move them over here. Note that the two models must originate from the same wall section and move to the same wall section. So if our player put down two clerks, then they could take these two cavalry and move them to the center, and then they could take this archer and move them to the far left. This is the engineer's workshop. For every clerk you put in the engineer's workshop, you can build a single barricade. Barricades cost 2 of any resources. So you can pay 2 wood, or wood and a stone, or stone and a gold. You can pay 2 things in any combination. Then you get to take the barricade and place it in front of the wall as extra defense. And we'll look at what barricades do when we get to spring. You also gain a bonus of 2 honor. So that's 2 victory points for building the barricade. The barricade spaces are here, and each wall has a maximum of 3 barricades that it can hold. So you'll take the barricade and put it up in front of the wall like this. Next up, we've got the tea room. For every clerk you have in the tea room when it's full, you can move 1 up the track. And note that the tie is broken by the tea room. So we'll start by activating the red clerk, which will move the red disc to the top, and then the yellow clerk, and yellow will move up 1 space as well. The war room works exactly the same way, but it manipulates the leadership track. And we'll learn what the leadership track does when we get to the spring phase, because it's all about defense of the wall. This is the warehouse, which will come into effect in the summer, so we'll look at that later. But you will never put workers here. It's used for something else entirely. So that just leaves the Postmaster's office. Whenever players put workers in the Postmaster's office, they can purchase an advisor or a clerk from the Postmaster's board. And they purchase these in the order of their placement in the T track. So in this case, red will have first choice, and then yellow. So here we have the Postmaster board. Let us say for the purpose of this example that blue and red have taken this action, and that blue is on the top of the T track. The first thing that happens when you activate this board is that you can spend 2 meditation to drop the leftmost column. So why would you want to do that? Well, each column has an ascending cost, with cards and clerks in this column costing 3 gold and 5 gold in the rightmost column. So, by spending 2 meditation, you might get rid of 2 cards that you don't want and reduce the cost of these other 4. They will immediately drop down, and then the rightmost will be replaced from the deck. This is useful if you see a card that you don't want your opponent to have, or if you want to make your cards cheaper in terms of gold. Now that the blue player has done that, they can purchase 1 thing from this board, and that can be one of their clerks, or it can be any of the 6 cards. Let us say, for example, they decide to buy the Imperial Engineer. He's going to cost them 3 gold, so they'll take 3 gold from their supply and return it to the common pool. Then they can take this card and put it in their player area. This is only blue's second advisor, so they're okay for the moment, but they have a maximum of 6, and if they ever would acquire a 7th, either through purchasing it or by other means, they would have to discard 1, which might include the one they just gained. Now that blue has had their card, they can return their worker to their common pool, and we will replace the card immediately so that red has a choice of 6 cards to pick from. During this stage of the game, whenever you're picking a card, you will always get a choice of 6. Once red has chosen what they want to do, and red can of course immediately pay 2 meditation to drop these 2 cards as well, and move these 4 down. And then they can choose what they want to do. So we've looked at all the action spaces, now I'll take you through all the command cards, and then we're going to have a look at Spring and the Great Wall Defense. So you've got 6 command cards in the game. Work Harder, which allows you to place all your clerks in locations on the board, and then everyone else gets to move 1 clerk. This of course can be from your common pool or spaces already existing on the board, provided they're not full. We'll look at Betrayal last. Despotism, we looked at this one already. This is the one that gives you 4 workers and allows you to take an advanced activation. Raise the Banners allows you to immediately recruit a spearman for free, and then you can move a clerk to the barracks and another clerk to a chosen location. Everyone else gets to move 1 clerk. Additionally, you get to perform an advanced activation at the barracks, and all of your clerks count as 2 clerks. Note that Despotism allows you to choose any location to activate, which means you have the option of activating no locations. However, Because Raise the Banners says the barracks specifically must be activated, you must activate it. So if you were the only one that went to the barracks because you had to, and nobody else did, you are going to lose 2 honor. So think carefully about playing this card, and maybe discuss with your opponents whether they want to recruit any soldiers for the wall this round. You've got Tactical Order, which allows you to draw 3 tactics cards, and keep 2 of them, putting the other on the bottom of the deck. And then you get to move 3 clerks, and everybody else gets to move 1. Economy, you may upgrade 1 overseer. You have to pay for this, so you pay the price and upgrade the overseer. Then you can move 3 clerks, and everyone else can move 2. So Betrayal allows you to take up to half the resources in the warehouse. Well, in the first round, there aren't going to be any, so you'll never play this in round 1. But in round 2 and 3, you might find a selection of wood, stone, and gold here in the warehouse. And we'll look at how this gets here in the summer phase. However, what you can do is you can take half of one type of resource, round it up, so we could have 3 wood, or 2 stone, or 3 gold, and then we can also copy the effect of 1 card that's already been played in this command stage. So I'll show you how that works in just a moment. After you've used the card, it is removed from the game, and you cannot use it again. So here we've got our initiative order for this combat phase, and Betrayal has come up as the second card in initiative order. The player decides to take 3 gold from the warehouse, and then they can copy any other card in the initiative order. So they could have Tactic Order and Despotism, or they could even have Economy here, even though it's already been turned face down. Once they've resolved the full effect of the card they chose, then Betrayal is removed from the game. And now we're ready to move on to the spring phase and look at how we're going to defend the wall. So what I'm going to do is set up some soldiers, as you might see them set up at the end of round 1. And then we'll resolve the spring phase. So, in the spring phase, what we're going to do is we're going to activate each of these 3 wall sections, which represents a different combat, although they're all resolved following the same steps. We'll entirely resolve 1 wall section, and then move on to the next. And the order the wall sections are resolved is chosen by the order of the leadership track here. So yellow will pick the first one, followed by green, and then red. So with that in mind, I think yellow will choose to activate the rightmost wall section. When it comes to resolving a wall section, there are 5 steps that we need to resolve. The first step is the honor step, where everyone's going to get honor based on how many people are actually there. The next step is the tactics step, where some players can play tactics cards. Then there's the shooting step, where archers on the wall can shoot their bows. Then there's the engage step, where anyone behind the wall can come out to defend it. And finally, the breach step, where we work out whether or not the wall's been breached or not. So the very first thing that happens is the honor step. And in the honor step, players will be awarded honor for each one that's participating in the wall. So if you're the only one defending the wall, then you get 6 honor points. If there are 2 players there, then you get 3 each. If there are 3 players, then each player will get just 1 honor. And if all 4 players are defending the wall, then you get 0 honor. In our example here, we have just 2 players defending the wall. So in this instance, yellow and green both gain 3 honor in the honor step. Then we'll go on to the tactics step. If you have a tactics card, you can play 1 card face down. Each tactics card activates at different times. So once each player has chosen to play a card face down, then we check to see if any activate in the tactics step. There are 3 triggers for tactics cards. They might activate in the tactics step, they might activate in the engage step, or they might activate in the breach step. If they activate in the tactics step, then once everyone's had a chance to play a tactics card face down, if they choose to do so, anyone whose cards activate in the tactics step are flipped face up, and then any ties are broken by the order of the leadership track. So in this case, the charge allows you to engage with one of your soldiers on this wall section. So the engage step is step 4, after shooting. So essentially this allows you to get ahead. And the reason you might want to do this will become apparent in just a moment. Each tactics card also has an enhanced tactic along the bottom. You can pay the meditation cost here by discarding meditation, and then you can activate the bottom part of the card. This will completely replace the top part of the card, so you do one or the other. Then we'll move on to the shooting step. In the shooting step, all archers on the wall get to shoot. Now, on these level 1 walls, there's only space for 1 archer, so yellow player will shoot their archer. As we build up the walls, if you get, say, to this most advanced wall level, you'll have up to 5 archers on the wall. In which case, of course, the shooting order of the archers will be determined by your order in the leadership track. When an archer shoots, you grab one of these wound tokens and you place it on one of the slots on an enemy card. So we've got, on the enemy card, you can see 2 rows of 6 spaces. Now, on the infantry card, all of these spaces are what's called vital wound spaces, which means that in order to defeat the infantry card, all of these spaces need to be filled up with something. So that might be a wound from an archer like that, or it might be a model like this. Some cards have fewer vital wound spaces, they have these non-vital wound spaces. And we'll talk about how that works in just a moment. When the archer shoots, they can put out one of these wound tokens per archer onto the card. And no matter what space you cover, whether it's vital or not, you will get the reward pictured on the space. So if the archer shoots here, then the yellow player will gain 1 honor. And if the archer shoots here, the yellow player will immediately gain 1 stone. Whenever you cover up any of the spaces on a horde card, whether they're vital or not, you will immediately gain the reward on the space. It should also be noted that in this example, there's only 1 enemy card. In a subsequent round, we might have 2 enemy cards. Archers can shoot any enemy card in the column in front of them, regardless of how close they are to the wall. But now that our archer is done, we move on to the engage step. Any players with models defending the wall will take turns putting their models onto the enemy card. The order is determined by the leadership track, so yellow would start, but yellow doesn't have any soldiers defending this wall, so we move straight on to green. Green has 1 spearman, and so they can choose where to put the spearman on the card. And once again, whatever space they cover up, they will immediately gain the reward on that space. In this case, a single honor. Now, in this example, we've only got 1 spearman, but if there were more spearmen defending this wall, then the next player in leadership order would get to place a spearman, claiming the pertinent reward, and then we'd go back and forth until all soldiers had been placed on a card. Now it should be noted that spearmen can only attack the card directly in front of the wall, but horses can attack any card in the column. So if this were round 2, the horse could ride out ahead of the spearman and attack this card up here. And if you happen to be a horse, you can cover up 2 spaces at once. Note that they must be orthogonally adjacent and cannot be diagonal, and you'll gain both rewards covered. You cannot pass, so what that means is that all of the soldiers defending the wall must be placed on cards. And the spearman cannot skip a card until all of its vital wounds are occupied. That means all of the ones with this red-gold border are covered. The card is considered defeated. You cannot then place any more miniatures or wounds on that card, and it will be resolved at the end of this wall section's activation. Unfortunately, in this instance, our yellow and green player have been unable to take out the infantry card. It's simply got too many vital wounds. So what this means is they have failed to defeat the card. It is undefeated. Now that we're out of soldiers behind the wall, we move to the breach step, and we resolve this situation. So the first thing we're going to do is actually check the total breach value of the cards in front of the wall. And that's this big number up here. So in this case, it's 6. If there were more cards in the column, we would add it all together. But there's only 1 because this is round 1, so the total value is 6. Next, we're going to check the defense of the wall. Defense of the wall is 2 plus 2, which is 4. 6 is bigger than 4, which means the wall is breached. If it was a tie, the wall would be successfully defended. And of course, if the strength of the wall was greater, it would be defended. So when a wall is breached, the first thing that happens is any of the horde cards in the column that have been defeated are scored. We'll look at how that works in just a minute, but unfortunately we haven't defeated this card because not all the vital wounds are covered. Therefore, we must enact the penalty on the card, which in this case is -3 wood. This means that every player has to give up 3 wood, and for every resource they cannot or do not want to give up, they must lose an honor. Finally, any soldiers that have been placed on cards in the column are returned to their position behind the wall. Then, because the wall was breached, all soldiers, anyone behind the wall, and anyone on the wall are killed and returned to their owner's common pool. And the owners can pay 3 meditation for each soldier killed to keep them in position, i.e. still alive and defending the wall. So in this case, if green were to pay 3 meditation, they could keep their spearmen, and if yellow did not, the bowmen would be lost and return to their pool. After you've resolved the deaths of the soldiers, any tactics cards with the breach keyword are resolved. And then, if any cards have been defeated, the remaining cards in the column slide up. So in this example here, this card has been defeated because all of the vital wound positions are covered. So this card would be removed and scored. And at the end of the breach step, any cards that had any empty spaces here would be filled by the cards at the back, moving forward. After the wall section is resolved, any barricade tokens are returned to the general supply. They only last 1 round. So it should be noted that our infantry card with the wound on remains here, even though all the soldiers are removed from it. So now that we've resolved this wall section here, we'll move on to another wall section, this one chosen by the green player. For the purpose of this example, we're going to resolve this situation here on the right. So here you can see we've got the battering ram, and the battering ram lowers the wall's defenses by half. You also have to give up 5 resources, so I guess everybody decided they didn't want to do that. So we're going to start by triggering the honor phase, in which case everybody's going to get 1 honor because there's 3 players present defending the wall. Then we'll move on to the tactics step, where everyone can play a tactics card if they want to. In this case, our blue player plays down this card here, but yellow and red have no cards they want to play. Then we move on to the shooting step, and the blue player puts down one of these wound tokens here and grabs a stone for themselves. And then it's on to the engage step. And we start with the yellow player because they're first in the leadership track. The yellow player decides to take this spot right here. They get a stone immediately. Then it's red's turn because they're next in the leadership track, and they go out here to grab a wood. And then it's blue, and they decide to put their horse up here to grab a wood and a stone. And then next, it's going to be the yellow player again. They'll go down here for a stone. Now the blue player has a choice. They can actually decide not to finish off this last vital wound, which means the card won't be defeated. They could also go up here to these non-vital wound spaces to grab extra resources. They decide now is the time to trigger their tactics card, which says instead of engaging with a soldier, kill it. It cannot be saved. And then deal 3 wounds to be placed adjacent to each other on 1 horde card. So they decide to use Berserk to kill off this spearman here. Then they take the 3 wounds and put them out onto the battering ram all along the front here, which gets them 3 wood. This will come in useful later, and we'll explain why. But they must then put out their remaining spearmen. Again, they could sabotage the card, but they decide to go down here, finishing off the battering ram. And now we've finished the engage step because there are no more soldiers waiting behind the wall. And that means that we move on to the breach step. And in this case, there's not been a breach because we total up the strength value of all the undefeated cards, and there are none, because the battering ram is the only card and it's been defeated. So now we're going to resolve the battering ram. When you're resolving a horde card like this that's been defeated, what you're going to do is total up the number of spaces on the card that have been covered with miniatures. So in this case, blue has covered 3, yellow's covered 2, and red has covered 1. So blue wins the card. In the event of a tie, it is broken by the leadership track. So what this means is that blue is going to gain 7 honor points and take this card. Some games, it won't matter whether or not you have a horde card in your possession, but some games will score you points at the end of the game. It all depends on the artifacts in play. But this would be the time to claim the card if it was pertinent. Anyone who participated in the battle gets 2 honor points as well. So this is just reminding you. So in this case, red and yellow would gain 2 honor points. If the archer on the wall had been the color of a player not participating in the battle, they would also gain 2 points. So even though the archer's not on the card, they still count as helping. So everybody here would gain 2 honor, with the exception of the blue player, because they won the card, and they get 7. So blue would claim this card, they'd get 7 honor points. There would be no penalty at all for resources or anything like that. But what will happen is, instead of collecting all the soldiers back behind the wall, as we did before, instead, we can take our soldiers back behind the wall and they will survive, because the wall was not breached. However, each player will check this kill score here in the middle of the horde card and lose a number of models based on this number here. So in this case, each player is going to lose one model on this card. And of course they can choose. You can still pay 3 meditation to save the model. So any soldiers that survive are placed back behind the wall, and any who were not saved with meditation are returned to their owner's common pool. Any wounds are cleared off the card goes to the blue player, and then any tactics cards that trigger in the breach step would clear as well. And finally, we would move down any pertinent cards if this were a later round. Now, it should be noted as well that our blue player is going to be gaining honor throughout this spring phase from their general and their advisor. It's very important to stay on top of your general's ability and your advisor abilities, because these are really important to helping you score points and win the game. So before I move into the summer phase, now that we've covered winter and spring, I'd really just like to talk about the table talk in the game. As I hope you can see from my description of the spring phase, there will be a lot of discussion about what section of the wall to defend, potential to help each other defeat cards, and also the potential to stab each other in the back, or do something unexpected. You will also need to discuss in the winter phase about what resources each other needs, and helping each other maybe fill up these locations. One player doesn't want to bogart an entire location because they'll be losing honor for doing that, but at the same time, what you don't want is to have your workers sitting in the quarry and it never activates. So you might turn to your other players and say, well, if you help me activate the quarry, I'll help you go over here, or I'll send some spearmen to that middle section to help defend it, and things like that. And so it's expected that there will be a lot of table talk and temporary alliances and helping each other out, gentlemen's agreements, and also backstabbing. And it will really depend on what kind of players you're playing with and the nature of your table, what behaviors you'll see emerge. And so now we'll talk about the summer phase and the blind auction. After we've completed the spring phase, we move into the summer phase. And in the summer phase, what we're going to be doing is we're all going to be going into our secret pools of resources and bidding on who wants to help build the wall. Every player will gather in secret from behind their player boards a selection of wood, stone, and gold. They'll hide the number of resources in their hand, and once every player has got a closed fist out over the board, then they'll reveal how many resources they have in their hands. These are then put into the warehouse to become contributions to the wall. What we'll do is we'll keep track of who put in the most, and whoever put in the most will gain a few benefits. So in this example here, we've just seen that yellow has put in 6 wood. Green has put in 5 resources in total, blue has put in 5 as well, and red has put in nothing. Every player will first be awarded honor based on their contribution. In this case, yellow has put in the most, so yellow will gain 12 honor points. The donation rewards are here on the back of the player board. Second place is 9, third place is 6, and fourth place is 3. Green and blue have tied, which means that their tie will actually be broken by their position on the T track. Uh-oh, Green. Looks like you're moving down a position. So blue will gain 9 honor, green will gain 6, and red doesn't actually get any at all because they didn't contribute a thing. They should have kicked in 1 thing and then they could have had 3. Once the honor points have been doled out, then we must remember the player order because the resources will be pooled and the player at the front of the line will get to do 2 things. The first thing they'll get to do is buy new walls. Each Great Wall has 3 tiers. In order to upgrade to the first tier of wall, you will have to pay 5 resources. The first tier is a level 4 strength wall with 3 archer positions. In order to upgrade to tier 2, you'll need 10 resources. Tier 2 comes with more archer positions and higher strength, which is built on top of the preceding one. And for the final level, you'll have to pay 15 total resources. And the top tier wall is, of course, this one, which cannot be upgraded any further. The player in front gets to choose where they build the wall and which level they upgrade to. They then take the pertinent resources. Note that they can only build 1 section of wall, so they couldn't build 2 sections straight away. But they will then take the pertinent number of resources of their choice and remove them from the warehouse. So if they're building a level 1 wall, then they'll have to pay 5 resources. So maybe they decide to get rid of some wood and some stone. This is returned to the common resource pool. They can then decide which section of wall this is going to be placed on. And once they've decided, the wall is just slotted in, and any archers there get to go on top of the new wall section. Each player can build a section of wall in order until the resources run out and there's not enough left to pay for a section of wall anymore. Then we move on to an advisor and clerk bonus. Starting with the yellow player, they can pick any advisor or clerk from the Postmaster board to take for free. But note that they cannot pay 2 meditation to change the board at this stage, but they could take, say, this 5-cost clerk for free, or they could take one of these 5 costs for free as well. But it should be noted, if yellow takes the recruiter, it's not immediately replaced as it is in the winter phase. So this means that when red goes last in this summer phase, they will have only the choice of whatever advisors remain. So they might just wind up taking their clerk because they don't want any. Once the advisors have been chosen and refilled, then it's time to finish the phase and go back to the autumn phase, which means we'll be doing income and production and the next invasion phase. In the final summer phase, we won't actually do any of the wall building or advisor choosing. We'll just do the final bid, and then we will end the game. When the game ends, everybody will have their positions on the score track, but we'll do final scoring for the 3 artifacts. Once those 3 artifacts have been resolved, then the player with the most honor is, of course, the winner. And any ties are broken by your position on the T track. So I hope that's helped give you guys some real insight into how the game is played. If you have any questions, please do leave them down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be joined by Michael, Ollie, and Chris, as all 4 of us play through the Great Wall in an attempt to defend it. So I hope you're excited to come and join us for that. Bye, everyone!